A very warm welcome to our virtual card issuing webinar here at Agen. My name is Guinevere, and I'll be your host today. I'm a Customer Academy Manager here based in Amsterdam. And I have the pleasure of being your host today. I'm very excited. Today, I'm accompanied by three great speakers. Over to you, Kira.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kira Berge, and I'm the Business Development Manager for Adyen's Issuing Solution. Thanks for joining us today, and I'd like to hand it over to my co-host, George.
Hey everyone, my name is George Smith and I lead global strategy for our card issuing solution. I am based out of our New York office and also very excited to be here today with you all.
Hi, I'm Colleen. I am joining from the digital pillar, the commercial strategy side of things. I'm based in San Francisco and really excited to join you today.
Great. Thank you for the introductions. Thanks for being here. A very warm welcome. Before we get started, a couple of things to keep in mind during the webinar. The webinar itself will take approximately 30 minutes. We'll leave some time over at the end for questions. You can see the Q&A functionality at the bottom in the Zoom, so feel free to put any questions you have in there. We'll pick them up at the end of the session. And after this webinar, we'll of course send a follow-up email. In this email, we'll put tips and tricks, but also ways to get in touch with us. So if there are any questions, you can always reach out there. And we'll follow up with you in terms of any questions you have. So that's it for now. I'll hand it over to Kira and enjoy.
Perfect. Thanks, Guinevere. So today's webinar will be all about virtual card issuing for supplier payments. We're going to start by talking about the benefits of virtual cards for B2B payments. Then we're going to explore what kind of business expenses you can typically pay with a virtual card. And we're going to give an example from the online travel space. And then we're going to touch upon some common challenges that businesses face when setting up a card program and ways to optimize that setup. And then last but not least, we're also going to look ahead at the full potential of issuing beyond supplier payments. But before we kick off, let's do a quick audience poll to see at what stage of card issuing everyone is in.
Yes.
So Guinevere, if you could go ahead and launch the poll.
Yeah, launching the question now. Indeed. So what stage of card issuing is your business currently in? Is it that you have an existing program, that you're building out a card program, that you're thinking about card issuing, or that you don't do issuing at all, and that you maybe haven't even thought about it? So I'll give everyone a few seconds to fill that in. I see the answers are quite scattered. All right. I think most of our attendees either have an existing program or don't do issuing yet. And we have a couple that are building out or thinking about it. So that's great.
Exciting. So good to see a nice mix. And hopefully by the end of this webinar, you won't just understand what card issuing is, but you also know what it takes to launch a successful program, or for those of you who already have a program, how to optimize it. But George, for those that are new to issuing, why don't we start simple? What is a card and how do you actually use it?
Yeah, thanks, Kara. So when we think about cards, our minds typically gravitate towards the physical pieces of plastic that we all carry with us in our wallets day to day. But cards are just a payment method. And like all payment methods, they're a tool to exchange value between two parties to settle a transaction. And if we take a step back from that physical form factor, cards at their root essence are really just a collection of alphanumeric characters, most notably that 16-digit PAN, that are used to identify an account holder and an accompanying balance or line of credit that can be drawn upon to settle a transaction. And those characters are bundled up into little transaction messages in the ISO 8385 format and exchanged through the various networks around the world at the speed of light. But really, when we're thinking about virtual cards, we're thinking about those little packets of data. And if we go to the next slide, I'll explain why this is so important. And the root reason here is that most businesses, or I shouldn't say most, many businesses don't care about physical pieces of plastic. What they're after is a way of moving money from their account to another account as effectively as possible in the manner most aligned with their business's needs. And for these types of businesses, cards and particularly virtual cards serve as this really easy entry point to the network rails, which have a whole host of advantages over other payment methods. So if we can move ahead one slide, Kara. So on this slide, what we're doing is showing you the benefits of virtual cards versus bank transfers, but these advantages hold true for all other payment methods, be it initiating a wire, sending a check, or even exchanging physical cash. So the first reason is that they are instantaneous. Those little packets of data can be exchanged around the world near instantaneously. And there is a little bit of nuance that we'll unpack later on in this presentation, in the sense of money doesn't ultimately move for overnight net settlement, but there is so much trust baked into the traditional four-party model that for all intents and purposes, you can think of card payments as being instantaneous. Not only that, they are global in their reach. So between the two main networks, Visa and MasterCard, I think there are 50 million merchant locations worldwide. So there is an incredible level of ubiquity in who you are able to pay via virtual cards. As I mentioned, there is a lot of trust baked into the card system. And one element of that is the ability to dispute a transaction by submitting a chargeback request in the instant that the vendor or merchant you're paying fails to deliver on those goods or services. Now, again, these things are just packets of data. There is no card stock that we have to manufacture, that we have to personalize, and that we have to send out. And when you spin up a card program, you'll be assigned a bin or a bin range that has tens or hundreds of millions of card numbers that you can pull from. So for all intents and purposes, there is a very little, marginal cost in generating a virtual card number. And because of this, you're able to spin up a virtual card for a single transaction and then close it down immediately afterwards, which helps prevent any risk of anything happening to that card should it be discovered by any nefarious actor, because it's no longer active. And in the online travel space, and as we'll explore later on as well, this also helps with your reconciliation greatly as well. But if that wasn't enough, you're also able to set transaction rules. And this is because most card payments will have an authorization and a capture stage to them. And it's at that authorization stage that the issuer processor or you as the merchant running your card program can put further and often very granular transaction rules in place to ensure all of that spending happens in line with your business needs. Now, those were all rather practical reasons. Perhaps the icing on the cake is that card payments help turn your payouts from a cost center to a revenue driver. And this is because of the interchange revenue that ultimately flows back to the issuer and is typically shared with you, the merchant running your card program. So these are some of the key reasons we see more and more businesses shifting to cards. But I will pass the mic back to Kara to talk about volume growth.
Thanks, George. Yeah, so clearly cards offer many advantages for business payments, but where does the industry stand today when it comes to adoption? Well, we know that around the world, there's around 120 trillion in B2B payments every year. And that number is estimated to reach 200 trillion by 2028. And within that, we see that the use of virtual cards to facilitate these B2B transactions is also growing fast. While in 2021, the global value of virtual card transactions stood at 1.9 trillion, it is expected to grow to 6.8 trillion by 2026. So that's more than 300% growth in the coming 5 years. And within that, B2B spending will account for 70% of this volume. And this number isn't concentrated either. If you look at the merchant sentiment, we see that that's also becoming increasingly high. Look at North America shows that 31% of US and Canadian businesses already use virtual cards to either make or receive payments. So these are some really positive trends when it comes to virtual card adoption. And we only expect these numbers to grow in the future as B2B transactions are becoming increasingly digital and happening via digital channels. Now let's have a look at some common business expenses that can typically be paid with a virtual card. Any business has some sort of recurring expenses. Think of advertisement spend, such as paying your Facebook or Google ads, or a SaaS subscription, like signing up your sales team for a LinkedIn Sales Navigator license. For a lot of those vendors or suppliers, there's often no other choice than to pay these recurring expenses with a virtual card. But you can also use cards for more one-off transactions, such as buying new office supplies or signing up your team for training. And then one industry that is already very mature when it comes to virtual card adoption is the online travel industry, where businesses leverage virtual cards to pay for flight tickets or hotel bookings and other forms of transportation. So these are obviously just some examples of expenses that you can pay with a virtual card, but in essence, you can pay any vendor that accepts them. So cards are really a powerful tool for business finance. To make this webinar a bit more specific, I'm handing over to George now, who's going to dive into the online travel industry and gives an example of how a transaction flow works there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kara. So as Kara alluded to, the online travel space is a very mature and established industry when it comes to their use of virtual cards. So the industry itself is absolutely massive. There's around $2.6 trillion in spend on travel globally each year. And 40% of this goes through travel intermediaries. So these are companies that sit between you, the traveler, and the hotel or airline you may ultimately be booking with. And within this space, there's roughly $100 billion going through cards today, all of which is growing each year, especially as the world rebounds from COVID. So an incredibly big and established industry. Now, if we go ahead to the next slide, please, Kara. So I think everyone on this webinar would be largely familiar with this user experience. You may be traveling to a new city and you need to book yourself a hotel. You will go to one of these online travel agencies, think the Expedias, Booking.coms, Hotel Tonights of the world. You'll be able to see all of the various hotels in your destination, sort and filter them all, and then ultimately make a decision of which one you want to stay at, submit your payment information, and see that your booking has been confirmed. So it's a really delightful user experience. But under the hood, there's slightly more complexity at play. So if we go ahead one, please, Karen. Maybe back one. There, this is the one. Perfect. This is because it's ultimately the transaction flow is being decoupled, and there's two very distinct stages. The first of these is money going from my account as the traveler to that online travel agency. And the second of those is money moving from that online travel agency through to that hotel or airline. So the first of those is your standard acquiring transaction. And in the second, we're seeing more and more online travel agencies turning to issuing services like Adyen to do that payout via a virtual card. So to show you how that works, we'll skip ahead to the next slide. And you'll see that there's a number of steps that ultimately go through. So as I said, these online travel agencies will typically be integrated against an issuing API. When they need to submit a payment, they will call that API to request a unique virtual card. They'll then insert that into the booking flow, sending it to the hotel, who then processes it as they would any other card payment. Ultimately, that transaction is approved. The issuer will settle funds through the networks to that hotel's acquirer, where they're then made available to that hotel to spend. And there's a number of advantages to using virtual cards in this flow that all mirror the ones that we spoke about earlier. So can we go forward one? Cool. So as we said earlier, card payments are for the large part instantaneous. And so this allows that booking to be confirmed immediately, which is really important when you think that you don't want someone else invariably taking that hotel room away from you. Because the card networks are so global in their reach, you're able to pay hotels wherever they may be located. Again, you're able to spin up a single unique virtual card number for each booking. So this allows you to see this perfect line item reconciliation of pay-ins from on one side to payouts on the other. That helps with security, but you can also put further transaction rules in there to further govern that spend. And then finally, the icing on the issuing cake is the interchange revenue that you'll ultimately be deriving. So those are the core advantages of using virtual cards in the online travel space, but there is a slight little bit more nuance under the hood that we'll unpack on the next slide. Cool. So as we saw, it is largely decoupled in most cases, with acquiring and issuing totally separately. This does create a little bit of complexity and is really the core reason of how we've tried to design the Adyen solution in particular. So actually under the hood, while ISO messages are flowing in real time, money flows aren't happening in real time, and there is a slight delay. So if you bring up that next stage to the graphic, Kara. Cool. So while I place my card information at the online travel agency and the booking or the card payment is confirmed, money doesn't ultimately flow to them till overnight and potentially another day later, depending on that relationship they have with their acquirer. Despite that, they have to make a payout to that hotel to confirm that booking. And in order for them to do that, absent the acquiring funds flowing in real time, they either have to park working capital with their issuer, which is costly, or draw upon a line of credit, which again has costs associated with it. But there's some nuance to the Adyen solution that I think is really exciting in how it solves this. And so I'll pass the mic back to Kara to discuss that.
Thanks, George. So up to this point, we've explained how virtual cards can be used. But how do you actually go about setting up a card program, and where do you suddenly get 1 million cards from? Well, traditionally, the way to go was to go straight to the schemes like Visa and MasterCard. But to be a member of a scheme network, you needed a license. And that's a path that many businesses didn't want to take. So instead, they turned to traditional banks who would sponsor you and act as your issuer. But that came with its own set of challenges. Think of legacy systems and infrastructure, or endless paperwork and a lot of administrative work. And on top of that, if you wanted to process payments and authenticate your payments, or KYC customers, or do risk management, you probably would have to find additional providers that offer that to you. So when you wanted to implement a card program, there were always multiple parties involved. And because of that, many modern fintechs have emerged over the last years. And they promise to streamline this entire experience and offer a more simplified process. And how they do it is that they have built a user-friendly API layer that they wrap around that legacy infrastructure. So they're not a bank themselves, but they offer one integration to connect you to all these banks in the background. And in theory, this sounds like a great option, but ultimately these fintech providers are just a veneer on top of that legacy clunky infrastructure. And they still depend on these traditional institutions when it comes to the kind of card programs they can onboard. And they're probably quite limited when it comes to the kind of features they can release, innovation, and the kind of interchange revenue that they can share with their customers. And then think of a business like an online travel agent that also wants to accept payments from shoppers and customers. So they would also have to find an acquirer that provides that to them. So the complexity is only growing, and there's often frustrating cash flow delays when it comes to getting your money from the acquiring side to the issuing side to make it instantly available for funding and spending. So at Adyen, we don't want you to think about acquiring and issuing separately. And that's why we've built one unified platform that lets you accept and spend money all in one place. And we've built this platform all in-house, so not by relying on third parties or doing any technology acquisitions. What it means is that we have our own acquiring licenses around the world, and we have our own banking licenses in US, in Europe, and now recently also in the UK. So that allows us to issue cards, but also offer other financial products such as bank accounts, capital, and many more. And on top of that, we also offer enterprise technology that lets you build really flexible card programs and really flexible card programs according to your business needs. So we really think that having one single platform offers huge advantages to businesses in a number of ways. The first one is global scale. By having one partner integration across multiple regions, you can launch new markets quickly. The next one is because we're not held back by any legacy technology, you can always have access to the latest innovation, and we can release new features very quickly. So you will always have future-proof technology. And then George already touched upon a few methods of funding. But having acquiring and issuing on one platform actually unlocks a new way or a novel way of funding, because you can now have incoming payments from your acquiring side instantly available on the issuing side for spending. So there's no cash flow delay. And last but not least, we also see that businesses are able to offset some risk that they have on the acquiring side by combining issuing and acquiring on one platform. That is because Adyen now has a lot of insights into the outgoing payments as well. And we know that certain virtual card transactions to suppliers can be charged back in case of supplier bankruptcy, for instance. So this is also a nice benefit, especially in the online travel space, where you typically have very long lead times. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to George, who's gonna share some light on some other best practices when it comes to launching a card program.
Yeah, thank you, Kara. So at this stage in the journey, I hope you're all enamored by virtual card payments and are very excited to go out and launch a card program to benefit from them. Between Adyen and the previous issuer I was working at, I must have spoken to hundreds of merchants embarking and going through this journey. And I think there are a couple key points that you want to be aware of to make sure that you can launch your card program as quickly and as smoothly as possible. Now, the first of these is to really understand the requirements of that program and what your business objectives may be. There are a whole host of companies out there looking to build expense management or embedded fintech style offerings. And for those types of companies, you really want to understand the user pain points you may be solving for, what their requirements are, what that true product experience is going to be. But when you think about virtual card payments and integrating that as part of your payout stack, the requirements are very much those of your business, and they change depending on what stage you may be at in your journey. So if you're just getting into card payments for the first time, you may be looking at a way to get up and running smoothly, quickly, and begin to test the waters compared to bank transfers. However, in the online travel space, and certainly at those bigger companies, it can be very common for them to work with multiple different issuing providers. And as they think through net new providers, they're often thinking about SLAs, geographic coverage, the currencies that may be there, the tech stack and reporting requirements. And it can get very, very nuanced and very, very granular. But it's really important to understand what those core requirements are, because that then informs how you go about the next stage, which is the research. Now, there are a whole host of issuers out there, and I don't need to labor the point, but Adyen is very clearly the best of them. But I do always advise companies to go through and research and make sure you pick one that is really aligned with and will help you solve for those requirements, but also have some of those other intangible feelings towards your company as well. So the partnership you may form, their culture as it relates to product development, where they're going to expand, all of that comes into play as well as you search for the right issuing partner. Once you find that company, you then are ready to start your issuing journey. And here it's really important to do a prioritization, make sure that effort is prioritized across your organization. When you think about a card program, there are going to be so many different teams within your organization that need to contribute to it. For instance, legal working on the contracts, finance understanding how they're going to reconcile all of the data, product interfacing with the product managers at your issuers, the developers ultimately going through and coding against that API. And as you get larger and larger as a company, that prioritization and collaboration effort becomes even more important. But let's say you have a perfectly aligned organization. I would leave you with the final point, and possibly the one I think is the most important, and that is to make sure you appoint a rock solid project manager on your side. I've seen this so many times, but I'd make the bet that if I was working with an online travel agency, for instance, that had launched multiple programs but didn't have a good project manager versus an online travel agency that had never worked in card issuing before but had the world's best project manager, the second of those would always be able to launch their card program faster and begin reaping the benefits of virtual cards. So summarizing all of that, understand your requirements, do your research on the vendors that are out there, make sure you prioritize this effort internally, and then have a project manager who can run point and interface with that issuer to bring that program live. Once you reach that point, you've got a live program, you're able to benefit from virtual cards, but you've also got issuing as a toolkit in your payment stack. And to talk through some of the areas that you can then take issuing further, I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, Colleen, to share some ideas.
Thanks, George. The great news is that once you have issuing embedded into your capabilities, that is just the beginning. And we are incredibly bullish on the travel and tourism industry here at Adyen. We have some of the market leading airlines, hotels, GDS, and OTAs all on our platform that we are able to influence this ecosystem as it grows. It is an industry that is literally and figuratively moving money every minute of every day in and out of every country globally. And we believe that issuing is one of those really fantastic products that can help accelerate both growth and revenue. Some of the other opportunities, once you have this embedded into your toolkit that we think of, is your ability to constantly understand evolving customer needs, trends as they ebb and flow throughout different parts of the world, and being able to react and respond to those needs by quickly understanding how your value chain is elongating, and the ability to add new suppliers, new vendors, new tour operators, new hotel offerings, and all of the supplementary goods and services that go in building an ever-growing package opportunity for your customers. With simplified KYC, with fast payments, you're able to ideate, invent, and actually activate instantaneously. We're seeing some really awesome trends rising with travelers right now who are wanting to book spontaneously once they are at their destination or in a different country, allowing the opportunity for passengers both to book on the fly through their mobile app, but then also be a trusted partner to those tour operators is great. You'll be able to instantly pay out. Travelers will be able to instantly book and really continue to create a longer and longer value chain that OTAs are bringing to the travel and tourism sector. We have great opportunities as far as thinking through borderless expense management. As employees are traveling globally, the ability to really simplify and streamline expense management, unlock global currency spend, turn that cost center into a revenue stream, as George was alluding to, is a fantastic opportunity for businesses to redefine and reimagine what travel expenses are. On the back end of that, it's incredibly simplified expense management submission that saves time and money for both businesses and their employees. It creates a fantastic employee experience when it goes from the dreaded expense reports into something that's simplified on the back end. And beyond that, as George was mentioning, you now have this toolkit to look at all of the money flows throughout your business, all of the supplier, the vendors, the consumer side of things. And while that might not be an option today, we do imagine a world where we can kind of help businesses understand all of the ways that money are flowing through their businesses in and out and alongside their businesses, and how we can help optimize and accelerate those when we think about loyalty, when we think about consumer possibilities, when we think about all of the ways that we can support travelers once they are on their journeys and in different parts of the world. We think that there's a ton of possibility, and at Adyen, we're here to build and invent and simplify. So we're here to build those different use cases out with you.
Great, thank you, Colleen. So this already brings us to the end of the webinar. So here's a quick recap of what we've discussed. So first of all, we've learned that the amount of virtual card transactions for B2B payments is growing around the world. And we really feel like it's time for businesses to seize that opportunity. Then we've also learned that virtual cards can offer significant benefits for your business, but it can be quite challenging to navigate through all the different options in the market when launching a card program. So hopefully by now you also know that Adyen is here to help. And with our issuing solution and single platform, we offer you everything you need to issue a virtual card program while remaining focused on your core business and what you do best. So thanks everyone. Over to you, Guinevere.
Yeah, nice. Well, first of all, many thanks to George, Kira, and Colleen for the great presentations. Thanks a lot for your time there.